What is going on, Fantasy Football Nation? Hopefully, last week might have been a week to forget for a lot of you guys. A lot of injuries that happened last week to some star players in Week 8. But this now we're previewing for Week 9 edition of the Fantasy Football Stock Report for your team, your league, your game. This is your home. You know where to go for information. And at what? Just read it. Okay. I'll read. Excuse me. I'll read it. I mean, this is very well written. But no, I'm not going to do it in the voice. No. No. Dear Fantasy Football Stock Report watch people, oh boy. I apologize for recommending Ryan Fitzpatrick, my boy, in air quotes, as a recommended fantasy option last week. I, like I'm sure several others out there, did not expect him to injure his thumb on the first play of the game. But I'm sure he was not the only one to experience injury and heartbreak. I feel very poorly for this, and so I don't know if I'll be coming on the show anytime in the near future. Again, please accept my humble apologies, and I guess I'm just a fantasy jinx. You are not. I don't know what else to say, so I'll just let the show go on. And I really, really hope that none of you lost your fantasy week because of me. Signed, Mob Guy. Oh my gosh, really? You didn't have to do that. Well, Ryan Fitzpatrick wasn't the only one that got hurt last week. There were a ton of other fantasy options that, got hurt last week. Some big name guys. Matt Forte. You might have all just lost Keenan Allen, me included, for the season with the lacerated kidney. So, and not only does it hurt for us this week with the fact that a lot of guys went down with the injuries, but there are 6 teams on bye this week, and we don't have a lot of quality players that we've been trusting all season long. So it's going to be a very, very tricky week this week for fantasy owners. So you're just going to have to, if you're really hurting, if you've lost guys. You also lost Le'Veon Bell this week for the season. Lost Reggie Bush. We've been using him as a flex running back. So just a lot of guys going down this past week. But hopefully you guys were able to find some gems off the waiver wire this week or make some trades, because this week is going to, I think, a struggle for a lot of owners unless they have really quality guys in their fantasy lineup. So first, let's look at the players that you're not going to have this week. These players, of course, are on bye week this week. We're talking about Baltimore, Kansas City, Houston, Detroit, Arizona, and Seattle. A couple of these teams, very, very big teams, competing, in their divisions. They can put up big points. And with Baltimore, another thing with the injuries, Baltimore, a shame, just a shame for Steve Smith Sr. to go down for the year with a torn Achilles tendon. He knew it right away, and that's the second time as many weeks that that's happened on a non-contact play. Happened to Arian Foster just last week. So it's very tough to see, especially when we thought that this would be his last year. Now sources are saying that he might actually come back in 2016. So we hope that's the case, because that would be a really literally and figuratively a painful way for Steve Smith to go out after a great career. So that's a tough situation in Baltimore. But so you're not going to have, so with quarterbacks, you're not going to have Joe Flacco this week, Alex Smith, Brian Hoyer in Houston. He's been more of a fill-in guy, but you're not going to have him. Matthew Stafford in Detroit. Carson Palmer, of course, has been a stud for Arizona, and, of course, Russell Wilson in Seattle. And speaking of Detroit, the Lions cleaned house yesterday, and I don't know if you guys noticed that, firing both their general manager and their team president after this 1-7 start. So clearly Detroit trying to get – but what was shocking to me is that their coaching staff is all safe. So Clearly, they think it's more of a front office thing to try to get the team in the right direction moving forward. We shall see what happens with that, but that was definitely a big major shakeup yesterday as well. Running backs you're not going to have this week with the buys. Justin Forsett, Charkondrick West in Kansas City, who has done, for at least the past couple weeks, a nice job of filling in for Jamal Charles, who's out for the year. Chris Johnson in Arizona, again, the resurgence of him, playing very well in Arizona. Andre Ellington, who's been more of a flex option now. And, of course, Marshawn Lynch, you're not going to have beast mode this week because of the bye. Wide receivers, you're not going to have Jeremy Maclin. Top receiver in the league in DeAndre Hopkins in Houston. Megatron Calvin Johnson. Golden Tate, his second top receiver there in Detroit. The big names in Arizona you're not going to have, like Larry Fitzgerald, Michael Floyd, John Brown, and Doug Baldwin in Seattle. And then tight ends you're not going to have this week. Crockett Gilmore in Baltimore. Travis Kelce in Kansas City has been a top tight end this year. Eric Ebron in Detroit. And, of course, Jimmy Graham in Seattle. So a lot of big teams, a lot of big names by this week, plus the injuries. This has been a very trying season, I'm sure, for a lot of fantasy owners, myself included. This has probably been, for me personally, the toughest season that I have had to endure because I've had players that haven't produced. I've had players that go down injured, and that is why I'm struggling right now at 2-6. So at this point in the season, I'm just trying to get guys that are going to produce the rest of the year. I'm trying to improve my team for the long haul the rest of the season, trying to make a late season playoff push. Anything that I can do to turn this ship around. So, if you're sitting in a good position right now, again, I've said it on here before, but consider yourself very lucky and very fortunate that you're in that position, that you've got some, healthy players, because trust me, I'm sure a lot of people would love to have that on their teams right about now. So let's just go ahead and dive right into the Week 9 matchups. Who are we going to play? Who are we not going to play this week? Who are we going to rely on to get us a win in Week 9? But first, let's talk about the Thursday night game last night. It was pretty much as we expected. It was pretty much straightforward. I tweeted out before the game on Thursday that I really liked a lot of the Bengals players and that I really didn't like a lot of the Browns players considering that matchup, and it was pretty much spelled out. Cincinnati rolls, beating Cleveland 31-10 to remain perfect, 8-0 on the season. I tell you what, this Bengals team is scary good, and I have a feeling that they may not make it to the AFC Championship game this year, but at the very least, I think that playoff drought that Andy Dalton has is going to end. Andy Dalton, once again, looked fascinating last night. Has 27 points in the CBS League, throws for 3 touchdowns, all of them, by the way, to my awesome tight end, Tyler Eifert. I love being a Tyler Eifert owner. I don't know, when you're watching that, I'm just like, I love how you call all 3 touchdowns yesterday, all in different ways, actually. One was kind of a deeper throw, but then the other 2 were right in the red zone, which is Eifert's bread and butter. And you realize now Eifert has 9 receiving touchdowns a season. That is more than Rob Gronkowski, and that is more right now than any receiver or tight end in the league. So that's pretty impressive for a tight end. But I tell you what, Eifert, his skill set, the big body, the ability to catch those balls in traffic, that is how he operates. So if you're a Tyler Eifert owner like me, you are obviously loving his production right now and clearly a tight end 1 moving forward. So, of course, you keep Andy Dalton rolling as long as he goes on. When it came to Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard at the running back split, I thought that actually both guys would have really good weeks. But it turned out that actually Gio Bernard had a much better game again than Jeremy Hill. Giovanni Bernard, now neither of them found the end zone, obviously, for a touchdown, which you would have liked to see. But Bernard, I think, ended up with 8 fantasy points, but Hill was very disappointing. I think even on the CBS side, he was listed as the start of the week and fell flat. So, and that's kind of what we've seen, unfortunately, from Jeremy Hill this season. He has been kind of I wouldn't say a full-on bust, but certainly kind of a mini bust, if you will. And Gio Bernard has been the better back to own in Cincinnati. So if you had Gio Bernard, you're probably happy with the 8-point performance this week, but you had Jeremy Hill, and you were expecting a lot more. I feel really bad for you because you expected a lot more. You expected a lot more out of Jeremy Hill, especially in this game with the matchup. So that was just tough to see. And actually, the receivers again had pretty decent days. You probably started AJ Green. And if you started Marvin Jones, and I made the recommendation on Twitter. if you were hurting at wide receiver and needed a wide receiver 3 plug-in, Marvin Jones would be a decent play. And he actually had like over 70 yards for 7 fantasy points, which is decent wide receiver 3 production. So, again, if you were hurting and you plugged him in, he probably paid decent dividends for you. As for the Browns, I didn't really recommend any of those guys to play. But in the end, Duke Johnson did get a touchdown. Isaiah Crowell led the work on the ground, but really neither of those guys are really nothing more than a desperate flex play at this point. Johnny Manziel, had again some flashes in the pan moments, but nothing that really screamed of him being, a recommended fantasy play. Now, Josh McCown, in all likelihood, will come back next week and will be the starter. Now, you got to say that you were impressed by Manziel on the touchdown drive when he took his team 92 yards down the field to throw a touchdown to Duke Johnson in the end zone. I got to say that was impressive, but that's all we saw from the Cleveland offense. So it's just a risk moving forward there. And Gary Barnidge still doing good things at the tight end position. Again, maybe more of a low-end tight end 1, high-end tight end 2. But once McCown comes back, it's going to be an entire upgrade for that Browns offense. So, but for this week, I just didn't like the matchup, and really it ended up kind of showing. Unless you played Duke Johnson as your RB2 or your flex, then you got the touchdown. But other than that, no real big performances from any of these guys. So, but it was a big night if you had a Bengal. Let's just put it that way. Unless you own Jeremy Hill, so let's just put it that way. All right, moving ahead now to the Sunday and Monday matchups. Big 1 o'clock game to kick things off. It's going to be Green Bay at Carolina. Again, two very, very strong NFC teams. Green Bay coming off their first loss of the season to the Denver Broncos. That was a very tough game for Packer owners there because that Denver defense is so strong, winning them games, completely shutting down that Packers offense. And even though this is a tough matchup also, the Pack should bounce back a little bit this week. The numbers should be better in this game. Green Bay, I think, is going to have to throw to keep up because Carolina, again, their offense has shown that they can put up points as well. They had the big win over the Colts last week, so they're undefeated. They're at home again, so Green Bay is going to have to keep up in this game. So I think you still have to roll Aaron Rodgers this week, even though he didn't have a big week last week. You still have to put him out there. He's maybe not a 5-star play, more of a 4-star, but he's still got to put him out there as a starter this week. You still got to start Randall Cobb. As long as he goes. Even in this tough matchup, you got to start him. As for the wide receivers, the other wide receivers, James Jones, Devontae Adams, Jones should bounce back. All the guy does is score touchdowns. That's all the guy does, and he should bounce back this week. Jones did have the donut last week, the 0 as he was shut down, but again, everyone was shut out by Denver, so. He's still a solid wide receiver 2 or 3 in my book, and you can still start him this week. Devontae Adams, more wide receiver 3 or 4 this week, as he's going to be fully back from the ankle issue. No issues there. Ty Montgomery's probably out, so then Adams goes back to that 3rd receiver role in the 3 receiver set. So I think you can use either of those guys this week. And Eddie Lacy at running back, again, a bit of a risk considering the matchup. But so for me, more of a low-end RB2. He had to be disappointing this year in the kind of, again, the lack of production you've seen from Eddie Lacy, the time where he was out, where James Starks came in and did a good job, and they've split time with each other. But for me, you probably, again, can't afford to sit Eddie Lacy here. So, again, more of a low-end RB2, not an elite option with the matchup, but probably someone you can't afford to sit either. As for the Panthers, I think you can probably, again, use any of the guys this week that you normally rely on. Cam Newton, you're still going to play him this week. For gosh sakes, again, Peyton Manning just carved up that Green Bay defense, so Cam Newton certainly is going to find a way to make plays. He's still his usual QB1 self, so you can use him this week. Wide receivers, Ted Ginn. Ginn now, he did emerge as the top option for a while, and he's kind of now fighting for targets with Corey Brown as well there. But for me, Ginn's usable as a wide receiver 3. I think Brown is more of a risky wide receiver 4 play. But you can still use Ginn as the top option in the receiving core. You're starting Greg Olsen at tight end. Obviously, continues to be kind of the main weapon in the kind of offense. But the Panther I really like the most this week, and I'm glad that I picked this guy up off of waivers when I did, is Jonathan Stewart, the Carolina running back. The Broncos on the ground, surprisingly, just carved up the Packers' D last week with a combination of Ronnie Hillman and C.J. Anderson. And Jonathan Stewart's coming off a 12-point game against Indianapolis. That's his third straight week with double-digit fantasy points. And I think he's just going to keep the train rolling against a defense, again, just got carved up by running backs. So for me, Jonathan Stewart is very much a high-end RB2 this week, with definite upside as a low-end RB1. I think you can definitely roll him out there. He's going to be a strong play. He might not find the end zone as much because, you got Mike Tolbert there in the backfield. And then you've got, of course, Newton's running ability on the keepers and Olsen. But, sometimes the Panthers do trust him in the red zone with touchdown runs. We had one on Monday night from like 5 yards out. So the opportunities are there for fantasy points for Jonathan Stewart. Now, the fumble loss last week, that might have been a little bit tough to see, but that was in the rain. You can understand that situation, so you got to forgive Jonathan Stewart for that. So I think you continue to use him this week, and I'm going to be starting him this week in my league as well. I think good things are ahead for him for the rest of the season, and this matchup for sure. Washington and New England. I mean, you start your Patriots in this game, bar none. I mean, you might usually start them any matchup, but this one, this is, again, as juicy a matchup as you can get. New England's at home. They're 2 touchdown favorites in this game by like 14 points. This is going to be, this game could be over by halftime. I mean, literally, this game could be over rather quickly. I like pretty much all the Patriots in this matchup. That's Brady. That's the running backs, Deion Lewis, LeGarrette Blount, Julian Edelman, Gronk, obviously. The other receivers, Brandon LaFell, Danny Amendola. I think LaFell is a risky low-end wide receiver 2 for now. Obviously, the chemistry eventually is going to come back, I think, between Tom Brady and Brandon LaFell. You hope also that the drop issue is going to rectify itself with Brandon LaFell. Like the first game back, he had like 6 or 7 drops. So you hope that rectifies itself as the season goes on. But for now, I think he's certainly usable in this matchup. Same with Danny Amendola, who's had some big weeks. I think you can use him as a wide receiver 3 in this matchup as well. But any and all Patriots, you start Patriots defense in this matchup, I think it's just too good to pass up. You start your Patriots this week. Really, for Washington, you really can't. I really can't recommend any plays except maybe Jordan Reed at tight end. He's coming off, one of his best games of the season. He had 19 points against the Buccaneers before the bye week. So, but for me, more of a high-end tight end 2 at best because, again, considering the tough matchup here. White out. If Deshaun Jackson, there's talk again that he could return this week, battling the hamstring issue. If he comes back, you use him more of as a risky wide receiver 3, but otherwise I can't really recommend any other guys. Pierre Garçon, Jamison Crowder, they're more than risky wide receiver 4s at best. I'd like to see them get Jamison Crowder more involved because they really like this young rookie out of Duke. They think he's playing really well, and I'd really like to see them get more involved. But for now, until he does get more involved, he's nothing more than a wide receiver 4. As I always say, I don't recommend any of the running backs because that's just a mess to avoid until one strong running back emerges, which isn't likely to happen anytime soon. And Kirk Cousins, no, Kirk, I don't like that. I don't like you in this matchup either. It's just asking too much, not even as a QB2 or a bye-week filler. It's just, now obviously the potential is there maybe for garbage time stats, but it's a risk. It's really a risk. So I really don't think you can even, fully play Kirk Cousins unless you're really, really in a deep league or if you're desperate, you're hurting at quarterback. I just think that's asking a little too much. Tennessee at New Orleans. When we're talking about this game, obviously you have to start with, it starts with Drew Brees. I mean, oh my gosh, the guy is just absolutely insane. The game against the Giants last week, insane. 52-49 was the final. Brees, 7 touchdowns, tying an NFL record. Eli Manning throws 6 in a defeat and loses. But if you were facing either of those guys in a fantasy league, I feel sorry for you because you probably, A, lost the week. If you didn't, I don't know how. You must have a really stacked roster. But great performances of both guys. Clearly, the Saints are operating on all cylinders right now. And obviously this week, I like a lot of the Saints guys in this matchup, considering the Tennessee defense is, number one, it's terrible. Number two, they now have an interim head coach. They fired Ken Wisenhunt over the weekend, so this past weekend, I should say. So now they're putting in Mike Mularkey as interim head coach. So it's a mess in Tennessee still. So obviously you're starting Drew Brees, obviously, after that performance. I mean, for gosh sakes, Tennessee's defense is so bad, he could throw 7 again this week. You're starting Mark Ingram, obviously. C.J. Spiller, though. C.J. Spiller also had a touchdown last week, and he could potentially find the end zone again this week. So, you know, his value is there with the fact that he's that dual threat back. I like him very much as a sneaky sleeper this week, and maybe even as an RB3 or a flex play. I think it's a matchup that definitely you could exploit if you're holding on to C.J. Spiller and seeing what you have in him. I think you could be put in this week as a definite flex option for sure. Love the Saints receivers for the first time in a long time, especially Brandon Cooks and Willie Snead. I like both these guys. I think both of them could be wide receiver 2s. Maybe Marcus Colston more of a wide receiver 3 if you're desperate. But you want to monitor Willie Snead's health this week. He is kind of dealing with a bit of a knee issue. He's been limited in practice, but it looks like all signs are pointing to him playing this week as a borderline wide receiver 2 or 3. So make sure to monitor that. Watch how he practices today. But if he's full go, or at least very close to full go, then you want to put Willie Snead in your lineup because these Saints receivers right now are just on fire with the way Drew Brees has been playing. And I think all of them could have very, very good weeks this week. And again, same with tight end Ben Watson. Ben Watson has emerged as a very strong tight end with upside here. I like him as a strong low-end tight end 1 this week. A definite bye-week filler if you need help at tight end. Say you don't have Jimmy Graham or Crockett Gilmore, and for some reason Ben Watson's out there in your waivers. Go pick him up. I mean, because he is getting the lion's share of the targets at tight end. It's no longer Josh Hill. It's Ben Watson. And his emergence has just been outstanding to see him produce this way. So I really, really like a lot of the Saints players this week. As for the Titans, all signs, though, there are pointing to Marcus Mariota coming back this week from the knee issue, which will be huge. It's I wouldn't say maybe a huge upgrade for the Titans offense, but certainly better than Zach Mettenberger, who did nothing with the Titans offense when he was there. So he's definitely an upgrade, but it's still a risky play regardless. I mean, yes, the Saints defense is nothing impressive, so certainly, sorry about that. The upside is there for Mariota to have some garbage time stats or put up some decent numbers. I think he's more of a QB3. You could use him as a bye-week filler if you're desperate, if you don't have, say, an Alex Smith or a Carson Palmer or a Russell Wilson, if you're desperate. But just kind of be aware that, tempered expectations on him. Delaney Walker at tight end, more of a what-the-heck tight end too, although he is a major target of Mariota when he's in there. So, again, if you have Delaney Walker and you don't have any better options there at tight end, then you could probably throw him out there. And usually he might find the end zone. We'll see what happens with him. At wideout, it's a mess right now because, again, injuries, off-the-field stuff has been hurting. Kendall Wright may not play this week with the knee issue. I think another wide receiver has already been ruled out for this week, the Justin Hunter thing. So that means that we might see more of the rookie Dorial Green-Beckham. We might see him more going forward. Coach Mularkey has already said that he's going to see more work and more targets moving forward. So, again, if you're really, really hurting at wide receiver, you might want to take a flyer on Green-Beckham to see what happens. But, for now, a very risky wide receiver 3 or 4 at best until we see if the Titans do utilize DGB more often. But but really, he's really the only Titan worth using right now, as long as Kendall Wright is banged up. So again, if you're hurting there, there's an option for you to play. And the running back situation, again, the only Titan I can recommend right now is Antonio Andrews, because for now, Coach Mularkey has said that Andrews is the workhorse running back right now. He's going to be the guy that's going to take the lead in Tennessee. But again, when he's in this offense, the situation, it's very hard to get excited about Antonio Andrews. So for now, for me, more of an RB3 or a flex for AA battery. You like that? AA Antonio Andrews, AA battery. Right now, it's a very slow battery. RB3 or flex play for me right now until we really see what he brings to the table. What is David Cobb's role going to be when he comes back healthy? Is he going to take on the lead role? It's kind of, again, a mixed bag right now. So, and Bishop Sankey, by the way, can be dropped in all leagues because of this. So, why would you have Bishop Sankey in the roster anyway? I don't know, but he can be dropped. So, but yeah, Antonio Andrews, right now, RB3 or flex play. Miami is at Buffalo this week. The Bills, I think, are going to be, majorly improved this week again because it looks like they're going to have two of their weapons back this week. Tyrod Taylor is finally going to come back this week after the knee issue, which is a huge upgrade for the Bills offense. We saw what Taylor did when he was starter. He was putting up big fantasy numbers. That running ability that he has and the ability to make plays downfield with the passes. As long as there's no signs of that issue, I think he's a solid QB2 with upside this week. 4-star for me. And even though the Miami defense, they looked good in their first two games, but now they play New England. That was a major wake-up call. They're playing, with Miami playing good offenses, they still don't look like a very strong team. So for me, this is a good matchup for Buffalo players to exploit. I like Tyrod Taylor. And Sammy Watkins comes back this week. All signs are pointing to him coming back. I think I read he was a full go in practice yesterday. So with that being said, I think Watkins is going to play this week. He will thrive again with Tyrod Taylor back at quarterback, I believe. I am playing him this week in my league. I got him off waivers. So for me, a low-end wide receiver 2 or high-end wide receiver 3 for me. Again, with no Percy Harvin there right now, he's going to be the lead guy. Robert Woods is still going to get some work there, so I think you can use Robert Woods as kind of a what-the-heck wide receiver 3 or 4. You're hoping that Charles Clay at tight end is going to get a lot more targets with Tyrod Taylor back. Clearly, Clay was not effective with E.J. Manuel at center, or under center, at quarterback. So you're really hoping here that Charles Clay gets back involved at tight end. So I think a tight end 2 with upside for me for Charles Clay. With Taylor back, and as for the running backs, you got to like Shady McCoy again this week. LaShawn McCoy, as long as he's healthy, he's back to being that RB2 self. Should still have a solid week for me, so I think you can put him in lineups as well. And Carlos Williams, he's finally recovered fully from the concussion, but he's really back to being a handcuff to McCoy for now. His kind of fantasy value window, I think, is closed for now. He's more of a desperate dart throw RB4 or flex play at this point. He might be used on third down plays, but for now, for me, so I like a lot of these guys. I think you can use a lot of these guys in your fantasy leagues this week. Again, get Tyrod Taylor in there, get Shady McCoy in there, Sammy Watkins. Those 3 are really the main guys I think you should play this week for the Bills. The Fins, I'm not impressed with really any of the Fins this week because, again, this is a very tough matchup. That Buffalo defense, very, very strong, as we've seen time and time again. Again, we saw that the offense was very much shut down by New England a couple weeks ago. So, for me, Ryan Tannehill at quarterback, for me, more of a desperate QB3 or a bye-week filler option. He is putting up decent numbers, but this matchup's a lot to be asking of him, so I'm not a fan of him this week. Lamar Miller is more of a low-end RB2 for me this week. Normally, he'd be a high-upside RB2, but not in this matchup, considering the tough matchup. So for me, very, very tough to trust. If you have better options, you can use them, but otherwise, it's a very, very risky RB2 play. And the wide receiver position with Jarvis Landry and Rashard Matthews, very, very risky wide receiver 3 plays for both guys. Again, you hope that the Dolphins eventually get more of Devontae Parker, their rookie out of Louisville, involved, but he's been banged up this year with a foot issue. You're hoping that happens down the line, but right now it's looking like it's not going to happen. So for right now, Landry and Matthews are the receiver plays there, but they're very, very risky wide receiver 3 plays in this tough matchup. So I like the Bills this week, not a fan of the Fins. St. Louis is at Minnesota this week. The big question here with the Minnesota Vikings is the health of Stephon Diggs, and he's been the breakout guy in Minnesota at wide receiver. He is dealing with a bit of a nagging hamstring issue, but from what I've seen and read so far, all signs are him still pointing to play this week. So As long as he plays, definitely can be rolled out as his high-end wide receiver 3 status. He's definitely developing a nice rapport with Teddy Bridgewater. And right now, I think really, again, he's the only Viking receiver you can trust at this point. Mike Wallace is very much hit or miss wide receiver 4, and Charles Johnson is definitely nowhere in the discussion. So Diggs is the guy you play right now as a high-end, high-upside wide receiver 3. Adrian Peterson, this is a tough matchup for him this week. Obviously, with that St. Louis front 4 is very, very strong in the pass rush that is there. But again, you cannot afford to say Adrian Peterson. He's usually matchup proof anyway. So for me, more of a low-end RB1, but should still produce good fantasy numbers for you this week. And Teddy Bridgewater against that pass rush, I really can't recommend him as anything more than a desperate QB3. He really hasn't had the kind of year that I think a lot of us expected. I drafted him to be my number 2 quarterback this year, and that really never panned out because they were so conservative on offense and leaned more on Adrian Peterson. So I really can't recommend him as anything more than that. Not even as a bye-week filler, I don't like Teddy Bridgewater in this matchup this week. The Rams' defense, I think, is going to be another good day. They've had a strong DST the past couple weeks, so I think you can use him in this matchup this week. I'm just not sold on really any Viking this week outside of Adrian Peterson or Stephon Diggs. And as for the Rams, I think really the only 2 guys, again, you can use here for this matchup for the Rams are Todd Gurley and Tavon Austin. Gurley obviously is a must-start RB1 going forward. You know that. You've seen the production that he has had. Again, although I mentioned the idiot in my league who has Todd Gurley on his bench, sits him, has given up on the season, doesn't even set his roster anymore, and won't entertain a trade offer, which is just stupid. So it's just to me, it's just fantasy suicide to put someone like Gurley on your bench all season and not give him up to somebody else who's going to use him. That's just my thought on that. So, but if you're a smart owner, then you play Todd Gurley in your league and you play him every single week going forward. He's an obvious must start. And Tavon Austin, if you're hurting a wide receiver, I think Tavon Austin, again, is usable as a wide receiver 3. All the guy does is make plays, and not just in the wide receiver position. They hand him off the ball. He makes these amazing, incredible runs. He's very, very versatile. So I think you can use him as a wide receiver 3 for this matchup because he finds ways to put up fantasy numbers. So I think you can utilize that. But Nick Foles, this Vikings defense is very, very strong. He has shown the kind of the flash in the pan moments, but just not consistent enough for me for fantasy purposes, and not even a desperate QB3 in this matchup. So I would stay away from Nick Foles. So the only guys you're starting this matchup are are the running backs, Gurley and Peterson, and the wide receivers, Tavon Austin and Stephon Diggs. So not a whole lot of producers for fantasy purposes in that matchup. Jacksonville and the Jets. I think this game could produce some very good numbers as well. Now, the big story with the Jets, and as Mob Guy mentioned in his letter, the quarterback situation for the New York Jets. Both Ryan Fitzpatrick and Geno Smith are banged up. They were even, after the game last week, they were even entertaining free agent calls to quarterbacks. They were really, really concerned about both guys. Now, both guys, though, have been practicing in full this week. I've been told, reading information, Ryan Fitzpatrick is wearing a glove on that non-throwing hand where he tore a ligament, or at least 1 or 2, in his thumb. But it looks like all signs are going to point to him actually playing this week through the pain, through that injury. And Geno Smith is still practicing in full. He's going through a shoulder issue. He got banged up last week as well. But he still looks like he's still going to be the backup behind Ryan Fitzpatrick. But because of that, I'm a little bit concerned about Ryan Fitzpatrick this week. I don't really know, one shot to that hand and he's done again probably. So I'm a little bit concerned with that. But considering the matchup, he should play well, as long as he doesn't take the hit on that thumb, if it doesn't bother him. So I'm going to say, at least a bye week filler if you're desperate. Low end QB2. I think certainly, again, the potential is there for fantasy points, but it's still a bit of a risk. So unless you have better options to play over Ryan Fitzpatrick, you can do that. But if you really know other options out there, a risky QB2 play at best, or a bye week filler for someone like a Carson Palmer or a Russell Wilson or even a Joe Flacco. So Very, very risky. As for the other Jets players, obviously with the matchup, I really like these guys this week. Chris Ivory is dealing with a bit of a hamstring issue for running back, but he looks like he's going to play. So as long as he does, you roll him out there as a strong RB2 with upside this week. And the wide receivers, Eric Decker, Brandon Marshall. Now, Decker is listed as questionable with a knee issue, and he was limited in practice yesterday. So that's something obviously you want to monitor. But as long as he goes, I think you fire up Eric Decker is definitely a strong wide receiver to play. Same with Brandon Marshall. He's dealing with injuries in his ankle and his toe. But again, as long as he goes, I think you can still use Brandon Marshall as a low-end wide receiver 1. This matchup is too good to pass up for these guys not to play if they go. So if these guys are healthy, you play them in your lineups. As for the Jaguars, this is a tough matchup for them. But again, the potential for garbage time stats is always there. So Blake Bortles, at quarterback, low-end QB2 or high-end QB3 for me. Maybe even a bye-week filler if you're desperate, if he's out there on waivers. Probably not at this point. But, for me, it's still kind of a risky play because of the tough matchup. But, again, the potential is there to get some late stats if the game gets out of hand. TJ Yeldon, he's put together some decent performances of late at running back, but I'm not sure he will against the strong defense here. I'd look elsewhere this week. More of a high-end RB3 if you're desperate, but not a recommended fantasy start this week considering the tough matchup. Now the wide receivers, I like these guys. I like Al Robinson and Allen Hurns this week. Obviously, I like Robinson just a little bit more. I like him as a low-end wide receiver 2. Hurns for me is more of a dart throw wide receiver 3 in this matchup. So I like either guy. Again, it depends which one finds the end zone, but I think either guy can produce well in this offense. And Julius Thomas at tight end, very, very risky tight end too. I don't recommend him as a must-start play because, again, that Jets defense just so strong. So I like the Jets guys in this matchup a little more than I do the Jags, but certainly some of the Jags guys are usable in this matchup for garbage time numbers. Oakland at Pittsburgh. I think this right here, this 1 o'clock game right here is going to be probably some of the biggest fantasy point producers of the week. This is probably, in terms of fantasy, or point game of the week. This game could end up being what Giants Saints was last week. I'm serious. This game is going to put up, I think, a lot of high numbers, maybe on the scoreboard and in fantasy, because I like both quarterbacks this week. I love Derek Carr. I got him off waivers in my league. I'm starting him this week in my league. Derek Carr has had, in the last 6 games, he's had 4 games of at least 20 fantasy points or more. He's coming off a 37-point fantasy week last week. The Steelers' secondary is weak. The Steelers are 26th in the NFL against the pass. They give up almost like 270 yards a game. They've given up 12 touchdowns this year. Carr's receivers core with Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree have been outstanding. You keep riding the Carr Express. You keep rolling that this week. You can roll him out there as a strong low-end QB1 this week. Same with Ben Roethlisberger. Even though the Raiders have Charles Woodson in the secondary, the defense has been very forgiving to teams. So Big Ben should still also be in your lineup as a solid QB1 this week. I like both guys. I like both running backs, Latavius Murray for Oakland and D'Angelo Williams for Pittsburgh, now filling in for the injured Le'Veon Bell, who's done for the year. I got D'Angelo Williams off waivers. I'm looking for big things from him moving forward. Murray, he's producing every single week. I like him as a solid RB2 with upside. And D'Angelo Williams, you got to remember, D'Angelo Williams filled in for the first 2 weeks of the season. D'Angelo Williams was the top scoring fantasy running back filling in for Le'Veon Bell. So keep that in mind, because that just kind of shows you what kind of talent he has and he can produce within this offense. So he's going to get the opportunity. He's a strong RB2, certainly with RB1 upside moving forward. I like both guys in this matchup. And the receivers, I like all of them. I think you can play all these guys. Amari Cooper is an obvious must start. Same with Antonio Brown. And actually, though, Michael Crabtree is actually getting more targets than Amari Cooper this season. And he's also finding the end zone occasionally. So I like Michael Crabtree as a low-end wide receiver 2 for the foreseeable future. I think he's definitely going to be still involved a lot in this offense. So And same with Martavis Bryant. Now, Martavis Bryant, you'll want to monitor his health this week. He is battling a bit of an illness, but as long as he goes, he's a very, very decent wide receiver 2 or 3 play for me this week. So I like all these guys in this matchup. Start your, well, outside of maybe the defenses, don't start the DSTs in this matchup because start your kickers, start these skill players in this matchup. Start even Heath Miller at tight end for Pittsburgh. If you're hurting at tight end, you can start Heath Miller because he's getting involved in the offense. So start your skill players in this Oakland-Pittsburgh matchup. Trust me, I don't think we're going to be disappointed with the results of this one. So I really, really like the guys in that matchup. That's your fantasy game of the week right there. Oakland-Pittsburgh. Who would have thought? Who knew? Afternoon games, Giants at Tampa Bay, a 4:05 game here. It makes you wonder what the Giants now are going to do for an encore after putting up those big numbers against the Saints, even in a loss. But this is a great matchup to exploit. Again, Tampa Bay's defense is very, very forgiving. So I recommend a lot of the Giants guys this week. Obviously, Eli Manning, you start with confidence coming off that 6-touchdown performance. Odell Beckham had 3 of those touchdowns last week, coming off a 31-point fantasy week. Those 2 guys are must-starts this week. You're starting them with confidence. And Ruben Randall, wide receiver, as long as Victor Cruz is still out, there's no timetable yet for when we're going to see Victor Cruz this season, if at all. So as long as Ruben Randall is still out there and getting targets, I think he's still a solid wide receiver 3 moving forward as well. What do we make of the running back situation? This is just a mess. I mean, this is kind of a mess like the situation in Washington, like the situation in Tennessee. This is a big mess because you've got 4 running backs in the Giants' backfield, and we don't know which one is going to get the majority of the work. Now, if I were to rank these running backs, going forward, I would probably put Shane Vereen at number 1 because, again, Shane Vereen right now is the most fantasy value because he is so effective in PPR leagues. But even in standard leagues, I think Shane Vereen's got some value as an RB2. Definitely a week-to-week flex play. He gets a lot of work. So for me, Shane Vereen is the top option. But I'm going to put Orleans Darkwa as the second option there in the Giants' backfield because I think the opportunity is there for him to get more work moving forward. I think clearly he's leapfrogged Rashad Jennings, who I dropped now as a third option. I don't think Rashad Jennings should even be owned this week in fantasy leagues because he's just fallen off the map. And I know a couple weeks ago I read that people would drop him, and I slapped that article in the face. I know I said that, but I think the writing's on the wall now. I think certainly, the signs are there. If they're promoting Orleans Darkwa over this guy, then I think the writing's on the wall that Rashad Jennings can be dropped in league. So, and then, of course, Andre Williams is not even worth owning because he's not getting goal line work anymore. He's very much a plotter. He's not, he's fodder. He's waiver wire fodder at this point, along with Rashad Jennings. So, for me, Shane Vereen and Orleans Darkwa have the most value. I like Vereen a little bit more as a wide receiver, as an RB2 or a flex. And Darkwa, maybe a what-the-heck RB3 play until we really see what we get from him. And like I said, Jennings and Williams have fallen off the map for now. Not recommended plays this week. If you own tight end Larry Donnell, you're not going to have him this week. He's out this week, officially out with a neck issue. So that means this guy, I think his name is Ty, something like that, Tie-Dye, something like that, is going to be your tight end this week. But very, very risky tight end to play moving forward with him. As for the Bucs, after what the Saints did to the Giants' defense, you have to be a little bit encouraged by the Bucs players this week. And actually, Jameis Winston, I like Jameis Winston this week actually as a strong bye-week filler or a QB2. I think, here's the thing about Jameis Winston that's interesting. He has not thrown a turnover. He's not had a turnover, whether it be interception or a fumble, in 3 straight weeks. So he's really starting to cut down on the turnovers, as I said, to have more fantasy value. And he's had that. So I think, and he gets that Giants D that gave up all this to the Saints last week. It's a stretch, but Jameis is usable this week. So if you're hurting at quarterback and you don't have better options, I think Jameis Winston is serviceable as a decent bye-week filler this week. Doug Martin, I think he can start as a strong RB2. Doug Martin is looking for his fourth straight game with 100 or more yards in it. So Doug Martin is really putting up great numbers for you this week. He can be started as a strong RB2. Charles Sims, maybe more of an RB3 or a flex. He's been, disappointing the past couple weeks, only like single-digit performances, but he still gets work in the passing game, so more of an RB3 or a flex play for me. Mike Evans obviously is an obvious must start. I know he had a rough week last week, but Tampa had a rough week in general last week. He is getting targeted, obviously, with Vincent Jackson banged up and Safarian Jenkins banged up and Murphy out for the year. Evans will still get the majority of targets, so he's going to be you throw him out there as a starting wide receiver for you this week, and I am in my league as well. Now, Vincent Jackson, he is still dealing with that knee issue, but even when healthy, he really hasn't been productive as, say, Mike Evans has been. So for me, a very, very risky wide receiver 3. But all signs are pointing to Austin Safarian Jenkins at tight end coming back this week. And I know I said that in weeks prior, but it looks like this week is going to be the week that Safarian Jenkins comes back. I like him as a low-end tight end 1 this week. I think, he was targeted a lot in the red zone when he was healthy. So I think, as long as he plays, he's a very, very low tight end 1 option for you. Atlanta at San Francisco, for me, this is pretty straightforward. You start your trio of Falcons. You start Matt Ryan, Devontae Freeman, and Julio Jones. I cannot recommend any 49ers in this offense this week. For gosh sake, they just benched Colin Kaepernick for Blaine Gabbert. Blaine Gabbert. I mean, really, it's just not pretty, folks. It's really not pretty, So avoid. Don't play any 49ers. Whatever the running back situation there is a mess. Also, now that Hyde's banged up and out, that Reggie Bush is done for the year with a torn ACL. I don't even know who they're playing. They have like 3 running backs they brought in off the street to play. So I don't know who, but avoid all that. There's some guy named like Kendall Gaskins or something like that. I don't even know who he is. So. Anquan Bolden, Torrey Smith, Vance McDonald, they traded away Vernon Davis. Don't play these guys. Just avoid them at all costs. I don't like them. Seriously. The 49ers right now are an absolute dumpster fire. That's what they are. Denver at the Colts. Peyton Manning going back to his old stomping grounds. And in all likelihood, he will probably have another big week. I got to say, Peyton Manning, boy, he really... silenced the critics last week. He really did. Looked actually quite strong in that win over Green Bay last week. And if you're a Peyton Manning owner and you held on to him, let's hope that mojo carries over, because for the first time in a while for me in this matchup with the Colts looking so bad, he's a low-end QB1. I think certainly he's usable this week. Obviously, you start his receivers. Demaryius Thomas is a must-start. Even though Vontae Davis will probably be on him, this week, I think you play him. You play Emmanuel Sanders as long as he goes as a decent wide receiver too. He's still dealing with the nagging shoulder issue, but I think you still play him this week. Even though he had a bad week last week, I think you still use him as well. And I never thought I'd say this, but, the Colts we know traditionally are terrible against the run. Ronnie Hillman looked good last week. C.J. Anderson actually had a touchdown, which angered me because... where's that been all year? And where'd that been for most of the season? You've been a bust most of the year, and I had to drop your butt. Where'd that come from? But for me, Hillman is still the back to own in Denver. I think, for me, a strong RB2 this week with definite RB1 upside. Anderson is more of a RB4 or flex at best. I don't want to buy in too much to the touchdown last week because, again, it's just too big of a risk. So I really can't trust him this week. As for Vernon Davis, now that he's found the new home here in Denver, I don't want you guys to throw him out there just yet. Let's see what he produces in this offense. Now, Peyton Manning traditionally has liked throwing to his tight ends, so maybe then he really gets Vernon Davis involved here. But for now, more of a low-end tight end 2 for the time being until we really see what he does here in this Denver offense. But certainly for Vernon Davis, an upgrade over being nothing in San Francisco. So at least for Vernon Davis's fantasy value, major upgrade. As for the Colts, the big story now with Indianapolis is the status of T.Y. Hilton. Now, he popped up on the injury report a couple days ago he's dealing with a nagging foot sprain. He has now missed practice the last 2 practices. So it looks to me like, and a lot of the media is saying that T.Y. Hilton in all likelihood will not play this week. So it's looking very bleak. So that means, what does that mean? More targets for Dante Moncrief, potentially more targets for Andre Johnson. But here's the thing, that Denver defense, as we know, is a beast. That Denver secondary is very strong. So any Colts this week are very, very risky plays. You just saw what the Denver defense did to the Green Bay offense. They nearly eliminated it. So the Colts for me are very, very risky plays this week because of this matchup. So I really, Andrew Luck, I don't know if he's playing hurt or not. I don't know. There's been multiple reports. They're being investigated for not having him on the injury report. I don't know what's going on with Andrew Luck. But for me, he's more of a low-end QB2 and a major bust alert this week because of this matchup. So I really can't recommend playing Andrew Luck. If you don't have better options, then maybe throw him out there and see what happens. But I really can't recommend playing him. I can't recommend Frank Gore. Very, very risky low-end RB2. I can't recommend the receivers, whether it's Hilton, Moncrief, Andre Johnson. This is just too tough a matchup for either guy. Even if Hilton goes, he's to me more of a risky wide receiver 3. If he's out, Moncrief is more of a risky wide receiver 3. Johnson is what the heck wide receiver 4. You really can't play any of these guys considering the tough matchup. And I can't recommend any of the tight ends. As long as the Colts continue to use both tight ends, you don't use either guy. So very, very high on the Broncos this week. Very, very low on the Colts because of the tough matchup. Philly at Dallas, the Sunday Nighter. I like a lot of the Eagles this week because of this plus matchup. Bradford for me at quarterback, Sam Bradford, more of a QB2 with upside, but he really needs to get his weapons more involved on a consistent basis. He has to take advantage of this matchup. And so, again, if you're hurting at quarterback and you need a bye week filler, you could probably throw Sam Bradford out there and see what happens for you. But, that's what he is right now, more of a QB2 until he gets these weapons involved. Really, the only Eagle I really, really like this week is DeMarco Murray. Because, again, the revenge factor, playing his former team in Dallas, especially what they've gone through with their crap load of running backs there in Dallas. I think Murray's going to kind of show to his former team kind of that stick-it approach like Andre Johnson did against the Texans this year. I think Murray's going to take that same approach. So actually I like DeMarco Murray as a low-end RB1, kind of playing like, hey, you let me go and now you're dealing with this stuff. Well, look what I can still do. So Ryan Matthews is handcuffed, kind of a risk this week. He's dealing with a groin issue this week, so we want to monitor that. But even if he does go, of course, he has value being that dual threat running back, but nothing more than a desperate RB3 or a flex play for me. Jordan Matthews at wide receiver is really the only wide receiver you can really trust, but we have yet to him to see have that breakout performance this week or this season. But it really could come this week against that secondary. I really like him kind of as a low-end wide receiver 2 this week. And Zach Ertz at tight end is just not consistent enough for me. Not even really worth it as a tight end 2 this week. As for the Cowboys, for now I think the only guys you can really throw out there as must-start options are Darren McFadden at running back and Dez Bryant at wide receiver. McFadden for me is a strong RB2 or a flex. Clearly now he's the guy there. The Cowboys got rid of Joseph Randle finally when they should have a long time ago. No one claimed him on waivers, and now he's a free agent, so he can go anywhere he wants. But I don't know if anyone's going to want to take a shot on Joseph Randle at this point. But yeah, Darren McFadden, fire him up as an RB2 or flex. Dez Bryant, at least a wide receiver 2 for now until Tony Romo comes back healthy. Matt Castle's trying at least to get him the football, so as long as he's healthy with the foot's not an issue, throw him out there as long as he plays. Not a fan of Matt Castle, obviously. He's still lost every game he's played in yet, so not even for me a QB3 or a bye week filler. Terrence Williams, can't even put him out there as wide receiver 3 right now. More wide receiver 4 with Castle at quarterback. And Jason Witten for me is more of a low-end tight end 2 until Tony Romo returns. As for the Monday Nighter this week, Chicago-San Diego, boy, this is a game that really, I think, kind of wondered what might have been because in this game we lost 2 key weapons on both sides. Chicago has lost Matt Forte now for at least a couple weeks with an MCL. I think it's a knee sprain issue. So in comes Jeremy Langford to take his place at running back. For the Chargers, though, a much bigger blow, and for my fantasy team myself, as Keenan Allen is done for the season with a lacerated kidney that he suffered, I think, catching a touchdown last week. So clearly, a big issue there. But there are some Chargers that are going to step up in his place. That means bigger value now for Malcolm Floyd, for Stevie Johnson, and maybe even for Dontrell Inman going forward there in San Diego. So for the quarterbacks in this matchup, I like both guys in this matchup. I think this could actually be a pretty high-scoring game. This could be a fun shootout game as well. Jay Cutler has had 21 points in 4 straight weeks now in a CBS league. And as long as Eric Weddle is out in the secondary, Cutler should be able to take advantage of that. And the Panthers receivers are healthy, except for Eddie Royal. But he's got Alshon Jeffrey. He's got Martellus Bennett. So he's got weapons there. Langford also is a very nice weapon out of the backfield to have. So for me, Jay Cutler, high-end QB2 this week, but serious QB1 upside considering the momentum he has right now, and a great matchup here as well. And Phillip Rivers, you can't afford to sit Phillip Rivers. The guy is putting up continuous strong numbers. Even though he just lost Keenan Allen, he's going to utilize these new weapons. That also means more work for Danny Woodhead in the passing game as well. So he's going to utilize these targets. He's still got Antonio Gates there as well. So he's going to utilize the weapons he has there. Phillip Rivers is still a strong QB1 play for me this week. Again, I mentioned Jeremy Langford. With Matt Forte out, he takes over this top role. I think Langford is definitely usable as a strong RB2 until Forte comes back. So for me now, I think you can put Langford in to your lineup this week as a definite strong RB2. Danny Woodhead for me, again, strong RB2 or flex play. He'll get more involved in the passing game now that Keenan Allen's out. He may still get goal line work. They're starting to give touches back to Melvin Gordon again, which does concern me a bit as a Danny Woodhead owner. But, he still haven't seen a big breakout game from Melvin Gordon yet. So right now, Melvin Gordon is more of a desperate RB3 or a flex player right now until we actually see if they're committed to giving him the football more. So very much a risk there. Wideouts. Alshon Jeffrey, now that he's fully healthy, you got to put him out there as a must-start guy. Definite, at least low-end wide receiver 1, high-end 2. He's the guy now. He's the most healthy of the bunch. You throw him out there. And obviously, like I said, Malcolm Floyd, Stevie Johnson. I like Malcolm Floyd as a wide receiver 2 moving forward. Stevie Johnson as a wide receiver 3. And Dontrell Inman, I think, right now, more wide receiver 4 until we see if he really gets involved in the offense. But certainly one to monitor on your waiver wire moving forward. And the tight ends, I like both Martellus Bennett and Antonio Gates in this matchup. I like Bennett as a solid high-end tight end too. Interesting to note, yes, Bennett has had single-digit numbers over the last 3 weeks, but he's been targeted 27 times. It's an average of 9 targets per game over that span. So Bennett is still getting involved in the offense, so that's why he is still a low-end tight end too for me this week. And Antonio Gates, as long as he's healthy, Antonio Gates is an obvious must-start play. If he doesn't go, then you want to monitor Ladarius Green's health as well. But if he doesn't go, then it's really, you don't want to play a tight end for the Chargers then. But if Antonio Gates goes, he's a must-start. He will get more work now that Keenan Allen is done for the year. All right, guys. That's all I've got for Week 9 this week. Again, I want to thank you guys so much for hanging in there. I know that I've kind of been a little late on getting videos up, but it's been crazy weeks. I was really busy early in this week with some things going on, so that's why this video is up on a Friday. But thank you guys again, as always, for your support, your views, your everything. As always, thank you for subscribing. As always, if you have fantasy dilemmas entering Week 9, please, as always, hit them up on the comment bar down below, or even on the channel and on the discussion page. As you guys know, I check my Gmail, so for leading up to the Sunday matchup. So please feel free to share your thoughts with what you're dealing with, what your roster is dealing with, if there are any injuries or situations with your team, or if you're dealing with the bye weeks this week like I am as well. I had to scramble to find guys. So wherever you're at, if you're trying to save your season, make a late season playoff push, if you're sitting at the top, we want to get you a win in Week 9 this week. So good luck this week, guys. Go out there and get a win, and we will see you again next week for the Week 10 edition of the Fantasy Football Stock Report for your team, your league, your game, your home. Take care, God bless, and good luck.